over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of great stuff going on over there. Again, very condensed weeks in both the NBA and the NHL. So my situational betting articles, very good resources for you over there right now. Also college basketball and college football situational betting articles to be for your reading pleasure over there. College football power ratings for week 14. Danny Vorg's put up his NFL model projections for the 3 Thanksgiving games. He'll have the rest of the week here on Thursday or Friday. So lots of good stuff going on over at BangTheBook.com. Make sure you check it all out. Finally, as you know, this and every edition of Bang the Book Radio, presented by our friends over at DSI Sportsbook. BTB and the number 200 is that promo code. 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook. 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. 2 guests on the program here today. We start with Brian Blessing, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline. Brian, how's it going today, man?
It is going well, bud. How you been?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. And I guess we'll go ahead and dive right in with a look at the NFL. And, you know, as we like to do here on this segment, before we take a look ahead, we'll take a look back at what we saw here in week 12 of the NFL season. And what really stands out are the 2 primetime blowouts.
Well, Lamar Jackson, this is, reaching a level of stupidity, how good he is. But the Rams are a dog's breakfast. It is amazing to me that, teams, and we see it in all sports, teams have a great year and you think, okay, they've turned a corner and you're going to trend up and then all of a sudden fall off the map. So I guess the moral of the story, it's nothing's handed to you. If you think you're so good and just show up and think it's going to work out for you, it's not. But the crazy thing about the Rams is they have literally played, with the exception of the Tampa Bay game, which was ridiculous, they virtually played every game this year like they played the Super Bowl last year. I mean, whatever happened to them and whatever the Patriots did to them, I don't know if it was a blueprint or whatever, but the Rams are just a mess.
They are. They are most definitely a mess, and you kind of wonder, when does this stop? And furthermore, too, we could start talking about this with the Rams. You're talking about a team that went to the Super Bowl, and they're not even going to make the playoffs this year in all likelihood. So what is their mindset the rest of the way here? What do they look like this week against an Arizona team coming off of a bye that's been better than most of us expected? The look-ahead line was -4 or so with the Rams a road favorite. A lot of 3s out there in the market now. You do wonder about the mindset of this team here as we go forward, and that is something we do need to consider here across a lot of these sports, especially the ones that are kind of winding down a little bit, in particular college football and the NFL. But what is the mindset of some of these teams here as they go forward?
Well, no, I mean, it's a great point because yesterday on a bunch of different shows, we were talking about, pending the result tonight, the game with Arizona, and you're seeing the reaction in relation to the number. Because the one thing you're getting with Arizona knows who they are. They're a team trying to build a foundation. And the one thing you get from Arizona is every game, they're competing. Now, the Rams basically had a win out or darn close to it, but to be so non-competitive in that game, I don't know that I'd go anywhere near the game. And Goff is a mess. The whole thing's just a gong show with them. But I think it is telling in that we've talked on this podcast for a couple of years. The week-to-week number and the reaction to what you last witness is pretty compelling because you've never seen 3-4 point swings, in an NFL game ever based on a previous result. But that's the norm now.
Yeah, it is. It's a very reactionary sport, to say the least. And, that's difficult because you've got a lot of teams that are just very inconsistent here this season. You've got some very good. You've got some very bad. You've got some very inconsistent in the middle. Speaking of one of those inconsistent teams, I swore up and down. I told myself many times over, I will not back Jameis Winston again this season. And I talked about this game last week, Tampa Bay and Atlanta, saying, look, this is an overreaction to what Atlanta's done the last 2 weeks, being a 4-point favorite here in this spot. I couldn't get myself to back Jameis Winston, and it was one of the easiest covers of the week to take Tampa Bay. I couldn't get myself to bet against New England again. Dallas winds up coming through in that one. it's almost like persistence pays off in the NFL, no matter how hard it is to make that play.
No, Winston, the one thing he can do is go up and down the field. The thing you don't know is when does the handful of box of rocks throws comes that are like instant potatoes that produce points the other way. So their defense looked good. He protected the football. They won for fun. The crazy thing is you can't trust Tampa Bay, but Jacksonville, I'm watching that game with Tennessee, Adam, and it's amazing. There was a lot of talent on this team, but it's a dysfunctional mess. Marone's toast on a stick now. I think these guys have run for the bus. And you're watching the Tennessee game. Oh yeah, you think he'd have learned something? Last year, Fournette ran off the bench, ran across the sidelines to get in a fight. The game was played in Buffalo, and he got kicked out. And he comes off the sidelines last week, and they're pushing and shoving after the whistle, and he was an inch away from getting thrown out again. Jacksonville's just a disaster. So you look at the impact of that number based on the last result. And what do they end up doing now? The Foles thing certainly isn't working out.
Yeah, and now you're kind of wondering, with bringing in Nick Foles, Gardner Minshew playing pretty well, you kind of tied yourself to Nick Foles for a while, and maybe Minshew's the better guy. So, again, at this time of the year in the NFL, these are things you have to start thinking about because, some of these teams that had expectations falling well short of them, and yeah, they're professionals, they're playing for a paycheck, they're playing for, free agent money in the offseason, so on and so forth, but you do have some lame duck head coaches now. You do have some teams that just aren't going to show up to the degree that you need them to in order to cover some of these numbers. So very much something you want to factor into the equation for the rest of the year here. Brian, let's start with this early Thursday game, Chicago and Detroit. And, it's a good thing this one's not happening while everyone's eating because it could make everybody sick on Thursday. Seems like Jeff Driscoll now banged up for Detroit. Matt Stafford not going to play. They were talking about trying to re-sign Josh Johnson again. It's a mess there for the Lions. And really, I think it's more of a mess than we've been led to believe because last week's performance against Washington was pretty poor from them. Chicago now a 2.5 or 3-point road favorite.
Yeah, we got to talk about it, right? I mean, but it would probably be Chicago or nothing for me. I mean, the Detroit loss to the Redskins, basically, that was a kick return. I mean, so I would watch this game and apply it to the Washington-Carolina game. I think if Detroit is moderately competitive, if Detroit wins this game, I mean, you go broke laying double digits in the NFL, but, Carolina was a punch to the gut. I mean, see how I bounced away from the Chicago-Detroit game? But I'm going to use the Chicago-Detroit game. I think Haskins is lost. And you put Haskins on the road against Carolina. If they don't pout off the hard-fought loss to New Orleans, I think Carolina rolls the Redskins. So I want to see an ounce of respectability from Detroit to enhance my opinion on the Washington-Carolina game because I got nothing on Chicago-Detroit.
No, that's perfectly fair.
Probably the under, but I'm not going anywhere near it.
No, I mean, that's perfectly fair. I mean, I guess you could say, when you look at the first meeting between Detroit and Chicago, that was the game where Driscoll was announced the starter on game day. Obviously, the team had more of an idea than any of us did, but the Stafford news came out on Saturday, of course, after I had already put in my super contest pick on Detroit. But then Driscoll starts, and Detroit very easily could have won that first meeting against Chicago. I think here, if anything, I'm teasing Detroit up. That's probably the play that I would make here, would be to tease Detroit up through 3-7, and then pair it with something like Tennessee later on this week, although that's a total that's kind of on the rise there. Maybe teasing Denver up through 8.5, maybe teasing Pittsburgh up through 8.5, something like that. I think you could go with a teaser option here for Chicago and Detroit if you feel like you have to play the game. Otherwise, like you said, there are definitely better options out there for this week and even on Thursday.
Yeah, I would recommend to people, if you're a $50 bettor and you were going to bet $50 on this game, take the $50 and go play horses for 3 hours, and then then let's get on to the other games.
I mean,
it doesn't mean because it's a crummy game. If you got a firm opinion, like I said, I'd probably lean, I guess, Chicago's way. But Chicago laying points against anybody's a terrifying prospect too.
It is, and Detroit's got a bunch of injuries on the defensive line, too. So that's something you want to pay attention to. It's not just Driscoll this week and the quarterback position. It's a lot of stuff on defense, too. But also, if you're $50 better, Black Friday, go find a good deal. It's probably going to give you more enjoyment than betting that Chicago and Detroit game.
Or take your $50 and pick a player out of the game. You find a player prop, do Taylor Gabriel over 67.5 receiving yards. You can probably trust that more than you can the game.
All right. Well, we got two other games to talk about here on Thanksgiving at least. That'll be our saving grace here for today. Game 307, 308, Buffalo and Dallas. Dallas 6.5, 7-point favorite, predominantly 6.5 out there in the marketplace here for this one. Total of 45.5. What do you think about this one here, Brian?
Well, it would be an intangible thing that's going to make the difference for me. Short week, traveling, playing Dallas, awful loss. You would think it's a tough spot for the Bills, and people shoot holes at their 8-3 record and who they've played. Well, let's cut to the chase here. Dallas is 0-4 against teams with winning records, so they've not stepped up to the plate. The irony is both Buffalo and Dallas played New England tough, and both Buffalo and Dallas lost because of a blocked punt in that game. Those games were so eerily similar, it was ridiculous. The one thing I would say, if the Cowboys run the football, because here's what Buffalo's doing that nobody really kind of identifies, I don't believe. It's very similar to what the Patriots defense is, as terrific as the Patriots defense is, and what Belichick does is he takes your best player away. But basically now Belichick's taking your two best options away because they've got Stephon Gilmore out on an island that basically is going to take the best wide receiver. Last week it was Cooper. A guy like Cooper is going to make a play or two, but he's going to mitigate the big play. The Bills do the exact same thing with Trey White, who does not get anywhere near enough recognition. The kid should have made the Pro Bowl last year. He is a lockdown corner. He shut down Beckham when he played him. I think it's a great matchup with Trey White and Cooper. Cooper will get a little, I think, but not a lot. And then the Bills' safeties are spectacular. And if the Cowboys run the football, Elliott gets 150 yards, they're winning this game. But the Bills' offense is starting to show signs of life. They're starting to implement Singletary a little bit more. John Brown is having a Pro Bowl season for the Bills at wide receiver. And look for Cole Beasley to be a big part of the game plan here going back against the Cowboys, and he helps the Bills move the chains. So at the end of the day, we're talking a touchdown. Some places it's 6.5. The intangible thing for me, Adam, is, and I think it matters not only to the Bills, it would matter to any team, but the Bills aren't on Sunday Night Football. The Bills aren't on Monday Night Football. This is their day in the spotlight, the only day. Now, they moved the New England game at the end of the year to a Saturday. So, all right, maybe, that there's a little glimmer of hope for that. But for guys like that feel disrespected and nobody gets to see them play, they're making their case to make the Pro Bowl and things like that. I think the fact that this is a big spotlight game for the Bills, I think individually is going to fire up a lot of guys, and I think could ultimately be the thing that makes them really live in this spot. And I think Josh Allen's doing a good job protecting the football. And oh, by the way, the game against Denver was played in 40-mile-an-hour winds. I mean, he was phenomenal. It's Miami, but the weather is good in Miami. He's been playing in just really adverse conditions the last month. Now it's going to be pristine conditions, so I would look for Allen's accuracy to be a lot better this week. I think it's an interesting game. It would be the Bills for me.
Yeah, it's Bills or nothing for me here, too. I mean, I don't trust Jason Garrett with 2 weeks to prepare for an opponent, let alone, essentially 3 days. I mean, this is one of those scenarios, too. And this was something that I heard on another podcast, and I don't want to, misrepresent what they were saying, but one of the things they were talking about is that, Dallas has done very well within the division. Jason Garrett plays well against teams that he sees all the time. Jason Garrett does not play well when he goes outside the division, and certainly not when he goes outside the conference. That's the case here for Dallas in this game. So I don't really anticipate Dallas having a very good game plan in this one. And that in and of itself kind of makes Buffalo pretty attractive. Obviously, wish you could have gotten 7. There's a couple of them still out there, very heavily juiced. Maybe one comes back at some of the more publicly tuned shops, but I think that keeps Buffalo close in this game, is that Jason Garrett is a disaster waiting to happen. And, Buffalo's coaching staff, while not great by any means, I think they're at least average, and that's certainly an upgrade over Garrett.
I saw this morning. The Bills are the number one team in the NFL against the spread. Dallas is also in the top 5 or 10. So that's an interesting thing a little bit. But everybody shoots holes at the AFC East that it's hot, it's hot garbage. It's New England and everybody else. But the AFC East, these teams, when they go out of the division, they got winning records. I mean, New England, the Bills, and the Jets are doing quite well when they go out of the division.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's just a big number too. This is a pretty big number for a short week, and I understand Buffalo's got to do the travel, but also Dallas coming back off of playing in New England. Obviously you're not going to do too much on Monday. I mean, they're almost on equal footing because Dallas had to come back off a big game.
I said this before for a Thursday game. I forget which one it was, but if you think about it, okay, travel's involved here. But what would actually be easier? Bills play Denver by 5 o'clock Sunday afternoon. The Bills are out of the stadium. They're home. They're in their own bed. They go out, celebrate the win, blah, 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 blah. Come back to work Monday morning. You get to work, blah, blah, blah. And then, Wednesday, hop on a plane and go. But the Patriots play the late game on a Sunday, and then they got to fly. They got to fly home. They're getting home at probably 11 o'clock at night, or on Sunday night. And then they probably went out and celebrated their win a little bit. At the end of the day, the travel, I think it's easier for Buffalo to go to Dallas on Wednesday than it was for New England or Dallas to go home from New England on Sunday. I think the travel's a wash.
I think so, too. One more game here on Thursday, 309, 310, New Orleans and Atlanta. New Orleans looking to exact a little bit of revenge. They lost badly to Atlanta coming off the bye. I did talk about that game, though, and I will elaborate on that a little bit more here as I break down this one. But New Orleans, 6.5, 7-point favorite here on the road against a Falcons team that kind of went back to looking like what we saw them look like early on in the year. Total here of 48.5.
Well, the one thing we know is New Orleans ain't going to be taking these guys lightly after the thumping they took a few weeks ago. So there's certainly motivation on New Orleans' side of the equation. The Atlanta thing was just confounding. I mean, they were a no-show after everybody's giving them full marks. Okay, they regrouped after the bye. They're a different team, and their defense was flying around. The defense was a no-show, and, Ryan was running for his life in that game. Listen, anytime New Orleans, Atlanta, indoors are playing, I'm looking over the total. I don't know. Part of me wants to say, okay, it's a bad day, and we just saw Atlanta match up really well against these guys, and they're a home dog catching 7. I probably like Atlanta in the over, to be honest with you.
Well, and when you look back to that game a couple of weeks ago, first of all, New Orleans was a 14-point home favorite. So we have seen a little bit of an adjustment to this number. Open 6.5, flip home field, it's 12.5. So a little bit of an adjustment from that result that we saw. But in that game, New Orleans gifted Atlanta 5 first downs via penalty, 4 of them on third down to extend drives. New Orleans got to midfield, turned it over on downs, punted it away. They had some inopportune or, some poorly timed turnovers. It wasn't as bad of a look as the final score would suggest. Yeah, it is when you talk about the two teams, but the way the game played out, New Orleans just had some untimely penalties and got stopped around midfield a few too many times. So clean up the penalties, get some of those conversions. This game could look very, very different. Again, it's a scary thing laying a touchdown on the road, short week, given the situation from what these two teams just had 2 weeks ago. I actually like New Orleans here. I think New Orleans can get this blowout win, and it'll set them up well for the remainder of the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, it was 26-9. And Atlanta did their part offensively in that game. So I think at home, Atlanta, will do their part. If they get it into the 21, 24-point range. But if New Orleans comes back with a sense of purpose and does their part offensively, and normally you would see this game I think, Adam, you'd see the total 51.5, 52, something along those lines. But they basically go, everybody's going to go back and look and say, oh, the first game was 26-9. And so I think the total's deflated. So I like the over better than the side, but I do like the game to go over.
And one other thing I'll throw out there, the Saints got by against Tampa Bay the first time around without Marshawn Lattimore. Look, in last week's game, they missed Marshawn Lattimore badly. And he may not play here with the short week, the hamstring injury. They're not going to rush him because of where they're currently sitting in the standings. If they don't have him, that adds a little bit more fuel to the fire for the over, because that is a player that they very much miss when he's not out there. And obviously we know Matt Ryan can sling it around a little bit. So that's another angle I'm kind of looking at here too, is that if Lattimore doesn't go, I like the over more.
And here's the thing, how that one guy would impact. What do? We just started talking about Stephon Gilmore in New England and Trey White in Buffalo. If Lattimore is not there, then that probably means now you're going to have to double up on Julio Jones, or basically go to a lot more zone, and then the underneath stuff becomes open, which should set up a guy like Ridley potentially to have a really big day. Because one guy's and a guy like that, the impact he has just has tentacles all over the defense.
All right, so we transition over to the NHL here, and we've got 3 games on the schedule tonight, but we've got 13 on Wednesday, 12 on Friday, 13 on Saturday. 17 teams playing 3 games in 4 days, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. 11 teams playing 4 games in 6 days, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. So, they give the league just about a full day off on Thursday. There's 1 game, New Jersey and Montreal. Then all of a sudden they screw everybody else over by having to play a bunch of games in a condensed period of time around the holiday. A lot of situational spots here across the board this week.
Well, right out of the gate, just blindly with what you just said, backup goalies are going to be popping up all over the place. And the question is, and I think more Friday, Saturday as we get later in the week, but the backups could be playing on Friday with the starter on the back end, or, the starter plays the first day and then the backup on the back end. So do your homework here and find out who the goalies are going to be, or what the goalie rotation is. And you can pretty much, of your own accord, assume if one goalie's playing tonight, the odds are the next night across the league, I think you're going to see a boatload of backups play. So therein lies the opportunity from a total perspective, because I will say this, I think the odds makers have done a lot more work and are much better than they've ever been in terms of hanging NHL numbers, but by a country mile, it remains the best sport to bet. You get a backup goalie goes in, total on a game is 6, and word comes out a backup's going to play. They don't even make the total 6 over 20. They don't even adjust, the juice attached to the spread. So that's the one thing. I don't think the odds makers are taking the backups into account. So I do think there's going to be some really good total opportunities heading into the weekend.
Now, what about the fact that all of this comes around a holiday? Now, of course, most of these players are Canadian or European or something like that. So American Thanksgiving doesn't matter, nearly as much to them. But 9 games last night, 8 home teams wind up with the win. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's something more. Does that factor into the equation at all for you? Teams that have to travel and be away from their families here for these holidays?
In some respects, I always like the road team in the holiday games. They're not pouting. I guess some can, but the bottom line is, all right, hey, we're stuck here. We got to do this, and we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving tomorrow when we get home. And, the home team sitting there, going home to Thanksgiving dinner or in the NBA on Christmas Day. I always like the road teams. Say, hey, listen, man, we're here. Why the hell not? Let's do something about it. Make it a business trip. I'm always looking to play the road teams on the holiday.
No, I think that's fair. I think it's a fair way of looking at it. You talk about, if you've got the Wednesday, Friday road games, which I think there's 5 teams in the NBA that have that. I'm not sure how many in the NHL. You wind up going on a team dinner. You wind up being together with the boys. You FaceTime your family and, you're together with the boys. And, those are things that can really help teams, especially some teams that, maybe kind of having a little bit of a rough go of it. So I think that you're definitely onto something there. But again, I mean, we talked about leading up to the Christmas break, especially here at Thanksgiving. Situational handicapping in the NHL, always a powerful tool. But like you mentioned here, so much of it this week, the backup goaltenders, fatigued teams, you got some long road trips for some of these teams.
A lot of injuries.
Yeah, and that too. And do you feel like injuries are properly accounted for in the NHL betting market?
No. And, if a name guy's out, obviously Crosby, Crosby's worth, whatever to the wagering line. Is he more than 40 cents? Maybe, a guy like that. But beyond that, I would say no, Adam. But depending who the guy is, it's remarkable because one guy's absence, just like we were talking about with Lattimore. But if some guy who's a real solid, even the third line center, okay, and he's out, the impact that has throughout the lineup, because maybe he's their best penalty killer, and it messes up the whole rotation, and other guys' ice time is impacted by a guy's absence. So, and we're speaking very much in generalities right now, but just because he's not a superstar doesn't mean that there aren't key guys that in various facets of the game have a massive impact because it upsets the rotation of the whole apple cart.
Yeah, and also too, you talk about a third line center. I mean, maybe that's your matchup guy against the other team's top line.
Exactly, but he's not a named guy,
right?
And if your third line center is the guy who's going to be the one who's out there, shadowing a McDavid or pick a guy. But he's not out there. I mean, the other team's first line improves leaps and bounds. Or because that third line guy's absence is out there, then the coach may have to tinker, and he says, let's go for it. We know we can't defend him the way we normally defend him. Maybe our best defense is a good offense, and for that one game, because the third line center's not there, they're going to say our best defense is a good offense. They can't score if they don't have the puck, so let's go for it. And all of a sudden, a team that would normally play a sit-back, counterpunch kind of game because that third-line guy out who doesn't have any value in the wagering line completely changes the way the whole game is played in terms of pace, and the game's a dead over because that guy's out, but nobody even knows he's out.
Yeah, it's definitely the case here in the NHL. Again, you got to pay a lot of attention to the details, I think, in the NHL hockey market, perhaps more so than any other sport, just because, again, not as many household names or known commodities or anything like that. What about tonight's card, Brian? 3 games on the board: Minnesota, New Jersey, Wild in a back-to-back off last night's loss to the Rangers. Boston, Montreal, Dallas, and Chicago. Dallas back-to-back with travel, off beating Vegas last night. Anything stand out to you about tonight's card?
Boston, Montreal, they get after it. They hate each other. It's always fun to watch. Slightly into Boston. Montreal's maybe wobbling a little bit, but they compete hard. They're a fun team to watch. That's going to be a fun game. The one I'd step up to the plate and play is Minnesota and Jersey over. Minnesota quietly has turned into an over team, and they're getting some offense, and they've righted the ship a little bit. So I do like the over 6. I thought that total should have been 6.5. And then you got Dallas is at Chicago, and having played back-to-back nights, having to fly to Chicago to play, and you'd normally say, oh, big advantage Chicago, but Dallas is on a heater right now. Dallas is playing spectacular hockey. They are feeling their oats right now. And I would envision, let me real quick, bear with me, Bishop played last night, and they beat Vegas 4-2. I would think you might get the backup tonight. Yes, you will. Huboden is going to play, but you know what? It's not been that big a drop-off. Huboden is 6-3-1 with a save percentage of .929, goals against the .215. He's been playing good. Chicago, of late, what they're doing is playing a different style. They're putting a forward high in the defensive zone, which gives them an outlet, and they're creating a lot of 3-on-2 and odd man rushes the other way. But by doing that, if you play against a team that's good on the cycle, they're getting pinned in their own end a lot, and that's kind of playing right into Dallas's hands. So, who's going to dictate the way the game's played is really the order of the day in this one. And that's a pretty interesting chess match.
One final thing I want to ask you about here with regards to the NHL. A lot of day games on Friday, a couple of day games on Saturday as well. So you got some teams playing, some uncharacteristically early games, especially with that Friday slate. Toronto and Buffalo play a back-to-back home-to-home. There are a couple of home-and-homes here Friday and Saturday. I believe there's another one Saturday, Sunday. Vancouver and Edmonton, with Vancouver coming off of a long road trip to host Edmonton on Sunday. But Buffalo and Toronto, back-to-back home and home. These two teams hate each other, but Toronto seems to have a little bit of extra spring in its step now that they got rid of Mike Babcock.
Yeah, and they'll get that short-term bump out of this, but the Toronto, they're still really flawed in their own end of the rink. And Buffalo is just, they've driven off a cliff here. And I want to see the response. The game on Wednesday night will tell me a lot more about this one. Buffalo's back home playing Calgary. In many respects, they outplayed Boston and lost the game. They beat Florida and were outplaying Tampa for a long stretch of the game. And then Dahlin got elbowed in the face and suffered a concussion while carrying the puck, and there was no call. So they got scalded by the refs, but more than anything, they scalded themselves because not one guy on that team did anything to react. And then they gave up 2 shorthanded goals on a power play. If they don't respond with a good effort against Calgary, this team's spiraling out of control. But the day games in Buffalo, for whatever reason, I don't know what it is. The Sabres always play well in afternoon games, and the building will be electric because almost half the building's going to be Toronto fans. That should be a game, I believe, that goes over the total. I like usually the Toronto Buffalo series. They're higher scoring games in Buffalo and lower scoring in Toronto. So that's a general rule of thumb.
Brian Blessing, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline. How can people check out those two shows, Brian?
Adam, noon to 2 Pacific time. Noon, we get Sportsbook Radio, and we get the top sportsbook directors in Vegas. We love doing that show. We've been doing it for more than a decade. And then Vegas Hockey Hotline's 1 to 2 p.m. I do it with our pal Stevie Slapshot. We get great guests from around the NHL, and you can listen to the shows live, kshp.com. There's a listen live function, and follow me on Twitter, Brian Blessing. I tweet the links to the shows out for you as well, and we do videos for you, my friend. We're going to focus on, we got a Bills-Cowboys video up there, but I think we're going to focus on some of the games coming up on the weekend. The Minnesota-Seattle game, to me, is a pretty compelling game, I think, that provides an opportunity. That's a game we're going to talk about.
Brian Blessing, again, the host of Sportsbook Radio and Vegas Hockey Hotline, kshp.com, at Brian Blessing on Twitter. Brian, we appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy Thanksgiving to you and yours, sir.
Yeah, bud. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. I know usually you come strutting out this way, so bundle up, sit down, put sweatpants on, eat, and watch football. It's not rocket science.